Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Stone. I'm the US correspondent here at Sky News. And joining me, as you can see, is Ali Bunkall in Brussels. He has just moved to Brussels after spending many years as Middle East correspondent. And you are watching a Q&A session on the state of play in the Middle East. What has happened, what it means, what happens now. We're going to try and get into all of that over the next 20 minutes, half an hour or so with me and with Ali. Ali, good to see you. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. Hi, Mark. It's a busy night for you last night.
Yeah, a bit busy night all round. But I guess for you, I mean, you've lived every twist and turn of this latest iteration 2 years ago since the October 7th attacks. You've lived every twist and turn of it in Jerusalem, in the region. It's a huge moment, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a really huge moment. And it's the third, let's assuming it gets over the line, which it looks like it will do. It'll be the third ceasefire during the past 2 years. The previous two ceasefires collapsed, the second of those earlier this year. But, you know, it does feel different this time. And I think you and I will get on to talk about many of the problems ahead and some of the unresolved issues, of which there are many. But it does feel different from a number of angles. I think not least because the US president this time just seems determined to push this through. And I feel, and, you know, I'd be interested to get your take on this because of where you are and you cover and study Donald Trump sort of day in, day out. But it feels like he has the wind in his sails now and he is determined to push this through, really come what may, and whatever obstacles either Hamas or Benjamin Netanyahu are willing to put in the way. Is that kind of how you see it?
It is, yeah, and we'll get into all of that. Just so you know, there's a QR code. I hope that you can see wherever you're watching this, whether you're watching on the Sky News app, on the website, or on YouTube. You can submit questions there. So we've got a few questions already that came into us earlier. If we get any, and as we get them over the course of this chat, we will try and get to some of them as well. So let's begin with Lorraine, who has messaged in to say, what happens next? Is actually this a deal done? Could this ceasefire actually lead to a lasting peace? Three big questions there, Ali, that get to the heart of it. What happens next? Let's begin there. What happens next over the next couple of days, do you think?
Well, what happens right now is that the Israeli cabinet is meeting to ratify the deal. And the assumption is that they will do, despite there being, there will be dissenters within the cabinet. There will be some in the far right, the likes of the finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, the national security minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, you know, really kind of far right nationalists who dream of reoccupying Gaza. They don't want a ceasefire that will see Palestinians being able to remain living there and perhaps under Palestinian control at some point in the future. But nevertheless, I think it will get through the cabinet stage. Certainly this phase will do. I think that, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if Bezalel Smotrich votes it through because he won't want to be seen to doing anything to try and derail the potential of the remaining hostages to come back. So I think it'll get through this stage. And if it does, then, and that should happen pretty imminently, then a ceasefire should come into force immediately. And then within the next 24 hours, Israeli forces are expected to draw back from their current positions in Gaza, much of it surrounding Gaza City, to agreed positions. And then within 72 hours, Hamas will have to release all of the remaining 48 hostages, both dead and alive. We think there's around 20 hostages still alive. And that will be a difficult phase because you know, the practicality is simply trying to find a lot of the bodies under the rubble, under the soil, wherever they now lie, will be tricky. But that should happen in the next 72 hours. Some people think it might happen over the weekend. Donald Trump, I think, said perhaps Monday. So that is the kind of timeline as we understand it.
Yeah, look, on the hostage release. I mean, I think that is an absolutely key element of why we are where we are now, because Hamas has committed to releasing all the hostages in one go. That's massively significant, and we'll get into that in a moment. But you mentioned those hostages who are not still alive. And I'm told from sources close to the negotiations that there is an acceptance that that will take more time. So although we will see the living hostages released, perhaps Sunday, perhaps Monday, Donald Trump said in the last hour or so, maybe it will be Tuesday, because they've got to make sure that the conditions are right on the ground for the release to take place. Although I think there is every expectation that that will happen, for those hostages who are no longer alive, their bodies will take longer to be recovered. And the reason that Hamas is giving for that, which I understand that Donald Trump, who's driving all this, has accepted, is that they simply don't know where they are, because the people who are holding them are dead. And so the people who are holding them are dead, and therefore they can't ascertain where these bodies of the hostages are. So that will require people on the ground, and clearly, obviously, it will take much more time to do. But there is a commitment, so it seems, from the leadership of Hamas to return those bodies to Israel. And so, but as I say, that will take more time. So I guess, going on to Lorraine's second point, could this ceasefire actually lead to a lasting peace? Well, for me, I think that's the big question. And I don't think anyone should get ahead of themselves. This is phase one. And Donald Trump was clear to point that out. This is only phase one that Hamas and Israel have agreed to. And clearly it's the case that we've been here before. There was a phase one of a previous ceasefire. We never got to phase two. Many would argue that is because Israel undermined it once they'd got some of the hostages back. The key difference this time is that Hamas, as I say, is committed to all the hostages coming out. The other difference is that Gulf Arab countries seem to be firmly behind this process. And of course, we're in a different place politically for Netanyahu. He may feel like he is in a better place to end this war now than he was perhaps a year ago. But I was just listening to the Palestinian ambassador to the United Kingdom talking to Yalda on the channel, and he was making the point that you're never ultimately going to get this done, get a lasting peace until you deal with the occupation. And I do think that it is worth reflecting on the West Bank, because although there may well be massive progress now on Gaza, what is happening in the West Bank is often ignored, and it is the case that there is kind of an annexation taking place in all but name, with Israeli settlers expanding consistently, constantly in the West Bank. And so you kind of wonder, what has Netanyahu agreed to in his own cabinet with those on the far right of his cabinet in the West Bank to allow them perhaps to agree to his plan now for a ceasefire in Gaza? So there's an issue there, Ali. Briefly, what do you think of that?
Well, yeah, I think there must have been some agreements being given behind the scenes on a number of issues. I think you're totally right about the West Bank not receiving as much attention perhaps as it should. But I also think that the far right nationalists in the government have taken advantage of the fact that the world has been, quite naturally focused on what has been going on in Gaza over the last 2 years, and the hostage situation, of course, to pursue their own agendas in the West Bank. And the likes of Ben Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich are they both live in illegal settlements themselves inside the West Bank. And I think they've, seen this opportunity, firstly, being in power, the far right being in the government in Israel has given them an opportunity. But the fact that actually they have been able to just very gradually and systematically chip away at territory in the West Bank over the last couple of years, and world leaders have generally been focused on what has been going on and trying to resolve the situation in Gaza. The other agreement or assurances that I assume must have been given behind the scenes is to Hamas, because if Hamas release the remaining hostages, to put it very crudely, and I know we're talking about people's lives here, but, in these terms, negotiating terms, that's it. They have given away any kind of future bargaining chips they have. And if Israel wants to return to fighting in Gaza, what assurances have they been given by the American administration that won't happen? I don't know whether you've had any kind of sort of inkling of that or whisperings of that, and that's actually sort of basically what viewer B has asked you. Can Trump ensure that Israel doesn't break this ceasefire?
Yeah, and that's a really great question, and I think that I think the difference this time, well, Trump is a different leader from pretty much any other U.S. president. He does things differently. He scares the hell out of everyone as well. So no one quite knows what he's going to do next, which direction he's going to go in, and that applies to Netanyahu in Israel as much as it does to the Hamas leaders as well. But I do think. What's different here is, in a very Trumpian way, he's kind of reversed engineered things. So through his envoy, Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and others behind the scenes, there have been Arab Americans, key Arab American figures who have become central backroom conduits in all of this. What they have tried to do is to persuade Hamas, look, if you want this war to end, and you're so diminished now that surely you do want this war to end, then there is one way of doing that. If you release all the hostages now and commit to doing that in one go, then Israel's justification for continuing the war is ripped away from them. There is no Israeli justification for continuing this war if the hostages are all home. And remember, so say the advisors talking behind the scenes to Hamas, Israel is weaker diplomatically than it has ever been. That, for you, as Palestinians or as Hamas, however you want to frame it, is a win, right? So you are in a better position as Palestinians, with Israel in a very weak position. If you release all the hostages now, then their justification for the war is gone. And I think that was kind of a key balance, a key sort of push to the Palestinian side, to the Hamas side, that was made behind the scenes. And another thing, I was talking to one of the negotiators yesterday, and he was giving me a fascinating insight into how he has been advising Hamas to praise Donald Trump. It's simple, right? But it's important. We've seen leaders around the world coming round to the view that actually, if you want something out of Donald Trump, you've got to flatter him. You've got to flutter his feathers. And Hamas, this hardline Islamist group, the last thing that they would ever want to do would be to be seen to flatter, Big Satan, Donald Trump. And yet that is what they did in that statement last Friday. They praised Donald Trump for his efforts in finding a form of peace. And they did it in such an overt way that Trump literally published their statement on his Truth Social site, word for word. And I can tell you that I'm told that the Hamas officials were flabbergasted that Donald Trump did that. But he only did it because it made him look good. And that then put them in a stronger position to be able to get Donald Trump on side, not with terrorists in Hamas, but with the Palestinian side of things, in order to pressure the Israelis to give way on some of their red lines. So I think that's a fascinating insight into what might have been going on behind the scenes. Ken has written in to say, yeah, go on, Ali, yeah.
So no, just quickly on something you were saying earlier about if Hamas give all the hostages back, that removes any kind of reason for Israel to resume the war. I think there is an outstanding issue that Netanyahu could find, and that is that, at the moment, we don't believe that there is any sort of guarantee, or at least it still needs to be worked out, how Hamas will be disarmed. And also, will its main leaders who remain in Gaza be forced to leave Gaza? And those were both red lines for the Israeli government over recent months. And at the moment, it's my understanding that hasn't yet been resolved. And, that could give Netanyahu an excuse if he, in 2 weeks, 4 weeks time, whatever, can produce intelligence that there are still Hamas gunmen running around Gaza. Look at, and this is kind of largely ignored by the world these days, but look at what's happening in Lebanon now. There was a ceasefire there many, many months ago, but Israel is still striking Lebanon, a couple of times every week. It's not a full-out war. It's not a land invasion anymore. But, there is still Israeli activity going in Lebanon. So, I think it's these unresolved issues that could cause hiccups in the future. But, Mark, I know you're about to go on to ask a question about flattering Trump.
I was just going to say, just on disarmament. I mean, look how long it took the IRA to disarm in Northern Ireland. That was one of the last things that happened, and it took a very, very long time. Incidentally, the guy that rightly sort of claims the legacy for Northern Ireland is one Tony Blair. who will now have a central role in the Gaza future, which is interesting. You know, you can either look at Blair's legacy in Iraq and think, what the hell is he doing back in the Middle East? Or you can look at Blair's legacy in Northern Ireland and think, this is a guy who knows how to compromise. This is a guy who knows how to deal with both sides, deal with
his legacy with the Palestinians
is
not terrific either, is it?
Yeah, well, no, right. It's not. But he is a guy who has a relationship with the Palestinian Authority. He knows people very well in the PA. He also has a very close relationship with Gulf Arab countries and with Israel. So look, there'll be people throwing things at the screen here saying, what the hell are you talking about? Tony Blair has absolutely no place in the Middle East. And there'll be others who say, well, hang on a minute. He is a guy who knows how to compromise. Look at Northern Ireland. Look at where we are there now. So a side issue. But on the disarmament thing, I think there is an acceptance, certainly Israelis I'm talking to say there's an acceptance that trying to get Hamas to give up its small arms it is just like it's never going to happen, right? You know, and I think the Americans believe that too. Steve Witkoff is of the view that you're never going to get Hamas fighters or people aligned with Hamas, and these are not necessarily card-carrying members of Hamas, but people who are aligned with Hamas's cause, who will have a Kalashnikov in their front room. They're not going to give that up, nor should Israel expect them to. But heavy weapons, yes, that is part of the disarmament. So let's see where that goes. Let's rattle through a couple of questions quickly and answer them in short. Paul W. has asked, what do we know about who and how Gaza will be governed? Well, we've discussed a bit of that. Tony Blair. Ali, this technocratic government, Blair will be involved. Donald Trump will oversee a sort of peace council. Who else do we think will be involved? Briefly.
Well, I mean, in terms of specific individuals, I don't know at this stage, but I think there will be Palestinian involvement, if not from the very outset. I think there will be some, and again, I think this is maybe a guarantee that Hamas has been given in order to do this. There'll be in the future some form of independent Palestinian control of Gaza. And again, you know, Benjamin Netanyahu has always ruled out any future in which the Palestinian Authority, the PA, would be part of the leadership of Gaza. It's complicated. The Palestinian Authority, which is largely made up of Fatah, one of the Palestinian parties, traditionally have not been friends with Hamas. They were forced out of Gaza in a bloody civil war in the early 2000s. So I think that will be difficult, but I can sort of see now a future where there will be some form of Palestinian governance, when there's been plenty of times over the past year when it didn't look like that would necessarily happen. But I think it will be a transitional phase, certainly from the outset, at least. Martin, I want to ask you a question that Ken's written about.
I just want to just on that, Ali. I just think very briefly, we should watch for Palestinian figures who now emerge from exile or from Israeli prisons. Two names I'm gonna mention: Marwan Barghouti, who is by every poll the most popular Palestinian politician, both among Hamas and Fatah, sort of street people, if you like, rather than, I mean, he is aligned to Fatah, not to Hamas, but consistently in polling over many years, he is a man who is very, very popular. Some might say even a kind of Mandela figure of the Palestinian cause. He has been in an Israeli jail for many, many years. There is speculation that he might be on a list to be released, although today we're hearing that perhaps he is not on that list. Maybe it wouldn't be in the interests of Hamas, who are negotiating to have him on the list, because he's part of the opposition party, a much more moderate Palestinian, some would say, the Israelis would not. But if he is released, he could emerge as a kind of Mandela figure. He may not be allowed, incidentally, to remain in Israel, West Bank or Gaza. He may have to go and live in somewhere like Qatar. But could he be some sort of a leader, a figurehead in exile? So he's one name to watch if he's released. Another person, Nasser al-Qudwa, is a senior statesman, Palestinian, the nephew of Yasser Arafat, currently in exile in France. Watch that name as well. I'm hearing suggestions that he could be coming back to the region. He could be a very, very significant figure. He's from Gaza originally. He is aligned to Fatah, not to Hamas. So watch that space. Sorry, Ali, I interrupted you.
I'll add a third then. Hussein al-Sheikh, very close to Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, probably works against him, but he does communicate quite regularly with the Americans and has been known to communicate with the Israelis, possibly could be seen as a palatable figure for those two sides. Yeah, look, I had a bit of a hospital pass today when I had to write an article about whether or not Donald Trump should win the Nobel Peace Prize now. And Ken has written in saying, if this does all go through as expected today, is Trump now set for Nobel Peace Prize success? Tomorrow, it's announced in Oslo tomorrow. So, Mark, I'd be interested. Well, my opening words were that Donald Trump seems to be more obsessed by the Peace Prize itself than actual peace. What do you think?
I'm gonna nail my colours to the mast here, and I'm going to say he is not going to win the Nobel Peace Prize tomorrow, and I'll tell you why. The nominations for this year's Nobel Peace Prize had to be in by the 31st of January. That was just a couple of weeks after Donald Trump took office. And it's true that by that point he had already been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. But much of the success, as he would see it, of 7-8 wars that he says he's managed to solve, it's not that many, incidentally. Some of the countries he said were at war were not literally fighting. And so he hasn't solved 7 or 8 wars, but he is close to perhaps solving phase 1 of this war. But they hadn't, all that success, as he would say, it hadn't happened by at the end of January. So I think it would be quite a surprise if the Nobel Committee decided tomorrow that he was the candidate to win. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm going to guess that he won't win it tomorrow. That is not to say, Ali, that he won't win it next year. If next year this peace in Gaza has held, and maybe he's got the Russians and the Ukrainians to a position of peace, well, then, yes, it would be very easy to argue, look, if the guy who took out so many people with drones in Afghanistan, one Barack Obama, if he can win the Nobel Peace Prize, then maybe Donald Trump is in with a very good chance next year. But my guess, not this year.
Yeah, no, that was my conclusion as well. I think next year, as you say, if the peace holds in Gaza, and there is progress on the Russia-Ukraine war, then I think he would be in with a good shout. And people have won it for less. Let's be honest, Obama's won. I think Kissinger won it during or shortly after the Vietnam War, when America was not seen in the best light globally. So, yeah, I think Donald Trump probably is in with a better shout in 12 months' time.
We've got a message. Ali, we've got a message from Izzy here. Can you make sure? Oh, well, we've done that. Sorry, I'm behind. I'm looking at my notes here, and we've already answered Izzy's question. So there you go, Izzy. What have we got here? Lisa has asked, what chances of US, UK, or other Western troops having to enforce this ceasefire? I would say nil. Ali, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you're right now. Having said that, over the last couple of years, I always sort of speculated that if you had some sort of international security force in Gaza, it probably would need some American input for the reason that you'd want it to be multinational. I don't think that the Arab states would want to do it by themselves, and I don't think that they would be trusted by the Israelis. And the Americans, if the Americans were involved, I think the Israelis would have some reassurance that they had the ear of the Americans in intelligence and military terms. So I always sort of speculated that if there was an international security force there, then there would have to be some sort of American involvement. It doesn't look, well, there's no suggestion that that is going to happen. So I think at this stage, unlikely. And I suppose if there was an international security force, would the UK be involved? I highly doubt it would be boots on the ground, to use that phrase. Possibly they could be involved in some other sort of arm's length way. But yeah, that is not at the moment something that seems to be on the table right now.
I think that it's likely that Middle Eastern troops will be on the ground, or perhaps Indonesian, but Muslim. I think there will be Muslim troops on the ground at some point, perhaps with blue berets on as part of a UN force. I think that's a possibility. Perhaps under at some command level, there could be a Western command structure in there, or inserted at some level into there. So you might see, I'm speculating here, but an Indonesian general running a force that has brigade level Western involvement and then troop level Gulf Arab involvement. So a multinational force, but one that is seen to be led by a Muslim majority country. I think that's a possibility, but we're jumping ahead now because we're clearly not nearly at that stage. And of course, it would need this sort of technocratic governance above it all, which actually it all sounds a little bit eerily like what we saw in Iraq in 2003, 4, 5, 6, which was like this thing called the Coalition Provisional Authority, which was a technocratic government. It had a group of Iraqis, many of them from exile, who were on a governing council. But the guy in charge was an American, Paul Bremer, who was in charge of that, and in fact a Brit who was in charge of the southern area down in Basra. And it was a disaster. It was a complete disaster. And look at how Iraq unfolded. So there are bad omens there, but crucially, the troops involved in all of that, they were not Middle Eastern troops. They were Brits and Americans and Australians and Westerners. So I think that lessons could be learnt from that, and also transition away from Blair and Trump as the figureheads here as quickly as possible, and get Palestinians in charge. That I think is clearly the hope. Ali, what other questions have we got?
Yeah, just quickly, one addendum. I think the Israelis they were always very skeptical about how effective or ineffective the UN force UNIFIL in Lebanon was at curtailing Hezbollah activity. So I think we know that the Israelis have a pretty poor relationship with the United Nations and many of their agencies at the moment. So, how they feel about that. And I was just thinking of British involvement. Where the British could get involved, where they have history, is perhaps training police forces or trained security forces, kind of what I'd say downstream. So not actually necessarily in country. They did something similar, you could argue not that effectively in Afghanistan. They call it Sandhurst in the sand. They've done it in other places as well. So that's the sort of area that the British could get involved, maybe, helping train up the Palestinian police force of the future in Gaza. I'm going to wrap two questions in one here because they're sort of the same thing. Derek said, can there ever be peace as long as Hamas exists? And Chris252 asks, why is Hamas allowed to survive after what it did to Israel on October the 7th? I think that is a question that a lot of Israelis, a lot of people around the world will be asking. How is it that Hamas, after what they did, are still surviving? What I would say to that is, at what point do you determine that Hamas has been eliminated? When is the last man? When is the last fighter killed? At some point, and I think this is what the IDF have really been trying to push home in the Israeli government recently. At some point, you have to transit from a military phase to a political phase, and the political phase, and we've seen it elsewhere in the world. I mean, you reference Northern Ireland earlier on in this chat. That will, done right, that will see an evolution of society in Gaza, which, done right, will see the end of Hamas, because if you give Palestinians alternative governance, then the hope would be that, Hamas will be a thing of the past. But just continuing to fight and fight and fight is really, a never-ending task. And at some point, you have to draw a line and say, well, we've killed the senior leadership. We have taken out much of their military infrastructure. Now is the time for a transition.
Yeah, and I suppose as the Palestinian ambassador to the United Kingdom was saying to Yalda, I referenced it earlier on, but he made the point that the root causes have to be dealt with, and that's clearly not in phase 1, 2, 3, or 4 of this plan. I shouldn't think. Trying to deal with the root causes, the occupation, as the Palestinians have described it for so many years. I mean, it may well be the case that we can get to a situation in Gaza where the Israeli forces have completely moved back onto the internationally recognized boundary of Gaza, so they are out of Gaza completely. We may well be in a situation where a technocratic government is governing Gaza. There are international peacekeepers on the ground, and the place is rebuilt. All very well. But then what do you do about the West Bank? What do you do about the Palestinian right of determination, a right to have their own state, the two-state solution? That's not mentioned in Trump's 20-point plan. I was struck that in Trump's social media message last night, where he announced that phase 1 of the deal had been completed or was in the process of being completed, what he didn't say, the word he didn't mention in that statement was the Palestinians. He thanked the Gulf Arab countries, he thanked Turkey, he thanked Israel. He didn't mention the word Palestinian. And so I think, for so long, that has been the problem, leaving the Palestinians out of the conversation. There does appear now to be a drive to include them in the conversation and include them in the governing council, whatever it is that will take over in Gaza. But until you deal with the root causes of all of this, the challenges will go on and on and on.
Yeah, and there needs to be a recognition and acceptance that you're not going to resolve everything on day one. This is going to be a step process, a stage process that, if it is going to be successful, will last generations. And you're not going to, have a ceasefire, release the hostages, withdrawal of Israeli forces, two-state solution by the end of the weekend. And I think that is also something that Donald Trump has come to realize. I mean, obviously less than a two-state solution, but rather than trying to agree every single point before you sign on the line and you stop fighting, let's work through it, try and build, not trust, you're never going to get trust between Israel and Hamas, but build the conditions where, you start with the hostages being released, Palestinian prisoners are released as well, ceasefire, withdrawal of troops, then you start looking, reasonably quickly at governance, the political process, rebuilding, reconstruction, who's going to fund the reconstruction. There is so much. It is an enormous project, if project is the right word, peace in Gaza. And at some point, the two-state solution will become a part of that conversation again, but right now it doesn't seem to be there.
It is funny that when I was living in Israel a few years ago, so many people would say on both sides, in fact, would say that the two-state solution is never going to happen, and they were talking about a one-state solution where there are equal rights for everyone, whether they be Palestinian or Israeli, in one state living alongside each other. That is not a Jewish state, but it is a state for all. And it is strange that we've now got back to this position where everyone is back to the whole idea of a two-state solution, even though it does feel to me to be as far off as it ever was. So I just don't know, and that's kind of what Michael P's question was about. Where does this leave the two-state solution? I don't know what you think, Ali. I don't think it leaves it, honestly, any closer now. We're kind of back to where we were in a sense, with trying to stop the war in Gaza, trying to rebuild Gaza, and then from there you kind of pick up and try and work out whether it's two states, whether it's one state, and so many people have got so many fundamentally different ideas about who has the right to the land, whether it can be shared, whether it should all be one land for one side or the other. Very, very difficult indeed. Just a couple of thoughts, and I'm interested to get your thoughts on this, Ali, because you've been really focusing on it, on the internal politics of Israel. Daniel Daniel has asked, what happens to Netanyahu now? Does he face a reckoning with the courts and Israeli voters without the distraction of the ongoing war? Well, I put this to an Israeli commentator, Nadav Eyal, last night on our podcast, and I was interested in his response because he said, and actually Yalda was arguing this in her analysis on our app as well, which you can read, that actually Netanyahu is in a stronger place now than if he was to have agreed this ceasefire a year ago. Now, with the elections, well, I can't remember when they are. You can remind us, but they're quite soon in Israel. He feels that he's suddenly like the peacemaker, the guy who brought the hostages home, and he's in a stronger position now. The magician, they call him, and they have for many years, because he is the master of politics, isn't he?
Yeah, the elections are in October of next year, but because coalition politics and the very fragile makeup of the current coalition, it'd be no surprise if they came sooner. And I wouldn't be surprised if particularly the far right parties do pull the plug sooner rather than later. I think if it hasn't already, once it really dawns on them that annexation of the West Bank and Israeli occupation of Gaza is now off the table, or so we think, then I think they will leave government pretty swiftly. So we could get elections well before October. It's a really interesting one with Netanyahu. I'm pretty convinced he was pushed into this position by Donald Trump. I think most people would agree with that. I don't think it's a ceasefire that he was looking to do, and I think it has Trump has sort of ridden over a lot of Netanyahu's red lines. But he will spin this to his favor, and whenever he does go to the polls, and he will already be in election mode. He will have been in election mode for some time. He was in survival mode after October the 7th, when nobody, me included, thought that he would be able to remain as Israel's prime minister. He has, and he'll be very much in election mode now. And he will be saying, I got rid of Hezbollah. I brought our hostages home. I took out Iran's nuclear facilities. I'm trying to pursue relations over the border with the new administration in Syria. And he will package that all up to the Israeli people, and again, try and convince them that he is still the right man for the security of Israel. It will be a much harder sell this time round, because he will forever be the leader in charge of Israel at the time of October the 7th, its worst ever attack on Jews since the Holocaust. And there will be, and there are, many people in Israel who do not forgive him for many of the things that he's done over the last couple of years. They believe to their core that he has scuppered past attempts at ceasefire deals, that by doing that, hostages have died in Gaza because they could have been brought out sooner. And so it will be very interesting, and it will probably come down to who his main opposition is in any election. I think probably at the moment, the best other candidate is Naftali Bennett, the former prime minister, who wasn't really particularly successful as an Israeli prime minister, pretty short-lived, but seems at the moment to be the possible candidate who could defeat Netanyahu in an election. I wouldn't rule out Netanyahu winning again, though.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, look, everyone, things to look out for over the days ahead. Donald Trump's movements, where will he go? There is a suggestion, he has suggested that he will go to Egypt at some point, probably to Cairo, maybe to Sharm el-Sheikh, where the talks are taking place. He will sign, he says, some sort of document then. I find it inconceivable that he won't go to Israel as well. He would almost certainly want to coincide that visit with the other massive moment that we will see, presumably over the next few days, and that is the release of the living hostages. What an extraordinary moment that will be. Another extraordinary moment will be the aid going into Gaza, the borders opened up, 4 or 5 of them, and aid run by the United Nations, which is not something Israel has allowed for many, many months, will be flooding into Gaza. So that will be an extraordinary relief for the people there. So big things to look out for over the course of
Will Trump go into Gaza, Mark?
Days. Would Trump go to Gaza? Well, there's a question. I had a slip of the tongue in a live report I was doing earlier, and I said he was going to Gaza. I then corrected myself and said he's going to go to Israel probably. Yes, but not immediately. I think Trump will unquestionably want to go to Gaza, but he's not going to want to get his boots dusty just yet. And the situation on the ground in Gaza will not allow for that yet. But as I'm talking, I'm just wondering, what a photo opportunity that would be. Of course, him with the hostages will be an extraordinary moment when it happens. But Trump in Gaza, that would be something that he and his team would want to make happen at some point. But I don't.
But if he knows his history, he does not want to be David Cameron and Nicolas Sarkozy walking through the streets of Libya, because look at what happened there. And so it will need Trump to remain engaged on this, I think, not to get the deal over the line.
But I think he will.
To lose interest.
But I think Trump has a short attention span. One person actually who's been involved in the negotiations said to me the other day that he was reminding Hamas that Trump has a attention span of a goldfish, which may well be true. But it is also the case that Trump has firmly attached himself to the success of phase one of this peace plan now. And even if he perhaps diverts his attention to whatever else may come his way, I think there will be people that want to keep this on track, because going back to the point we made earlier, if he doesn't win the Nobel Peace Prize tomorrow, he'll certainly want to win it next year. So it's in his interests now to keep this on track. But a big job it will be indeed. Just to mention, you can watch back this full Q&A episode if you only joined us halfway through or only just joined us. It will be on the Sky News YouTube platform a little later. It's also on our app and our website as well. So do go and find it there. Thank you very much for joining us. A shameless plug too for the Trump 100 podcast, which me, James and Martha do pretty much every day with guests as well. So go and find that as well. Ali, thanks for joining us. This has been fun.
Not shameless at all. Best daily podcast out there on the market. You're right to plug it.
I'll pay you later, Ali. I'll pay you later. Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us.